Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, the show where every episode I talk to writers about their work and the writing process. The show is available by the same name on both YouTube and via all of the major podcast platforms, and you can subscribe to either or both, which is what I recommend, so you never miss a thing. And I will ask if you are a subscriber, or even if you're not, please leave me a nice review. It helps other folks find the show, and I guarantee if somebody's interested in writing, I think they will enjoy this show because you're going to learn a lot from people who do this and do it really well. A lot like my guest today, whose work I discovered at the recent Left Coast Crime Conference, easy for me to say, in Tucson in March. Gary was on a panel that I had the honor to moderate. And I set up a meeting with all of the panelists beforehand just so we could get acquainted. And I'm really glad I did because I learned really quickly that not, all the panelists were great, but I really learned that Gary Kreigh has a really, not only is he a really good mystery writer, but he's also a really good guy. And he has a lot to share about writing with others. And so I'm really glad to have him on the show today. Gary, welcome to the Open Mic, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Well, for those who might not be familiar with your work, tell us a little bit about what a reader can expect from a Gary Kreigh book.
Well, thank you. There's a couple of things. I started out with two series of books because I didn't know really which one I wanted to concentrate on. One is a contemporary series, the Calamaro series, which goes into social issues, but and it's set in the Midwest. And it was inspired by a plane crash that went from Indianapolis to Chicago under inclement weather conditions and things. And so anyway, those social issues about looking as to why that plane crash happened, which wasn't apparent on the surface, is how I got started with that particular series. Then, because I lived in New Orleans, I also had a series, and I found New Orleans has a very 1950s, 1960s kind of style to it sometimes. And so I wrote it's Reverend Fountain series. And he comes from the Midwest down to New Orleans to visit his friends, but and he tries not to, but he can't help but get involved into other people's lives and things. So this is a 1950s New Orleans series from a retired reverend's perspective.
Well, and that particular book you're talking about is The Masquerade of Truth, which I've been reading and I'm really enjoying. I never get to read nearly as much as I really want to, but I'm really enjoying it. And I want to ask you a question about dialogue and that kind of thing, but I'll get to that in just a moment, because the first thing I wanted to ask was, you spent your working career in forensic accounting, fraud examination, and internal auditing, and you've brought elements of those into your mystery writing. And I had to say, when I first read it, I thought, well, those are not things that most mystery writers would build their careers on. You do it quite well. Did you ever have any hesitation about using your expertise in those areas for your writing?
Oh, well, absolutely. In fact, one of my novels, Paola, it has a bit of fraud in it from the 1950s Paola scandal, if you remember that, in the entertainment industry. And my wife finished the book, and she's like, it has got fraud in it. It's got so much fraud in it, and she's not particularly fond of fraud. But fraud fascinates me. I'm like an accountant by trade, and I was very glad to have got into forensic accounting because there is mystery in every time you open up books and things. And so there's technical as well as the human element that you have to get ahead of, just like a detective. But I figured, and this is I was quite fond of John Grisham, and he can take lawyer and his profession and turn it into a mystery. And I figured, well, why can't I take a forensic accountant and do the same thing and try to put a little spin on it? So there's not a whole lot of fraud, technical fraud type things in there, but enough that you know who I am.
Right. Well, in that regard, if you would share some of the techniques that you employ for building suspense and tension in your stories.
Absolutely. I think first of all, you have to have a certain voice and style throughout the stories. Both of my series have two different kinds, I believe. Um, uh, my Calamaro series has more of a serious tone to it, but the Reverend Fountain series is a little bit lighter. The characters are really uh, I don't want to say wild, but they're very colorful individuals and things. And so you have to be true to that and stay with that. Then also it's gotta have a really good flow to it and keep going. And I learned quite quickly that I can get bogged down in all the stuff that goes on in New Orleans without getting into the story. So I had to have a good balance, and I think a good mystery does have that kind of a balance. And of course, conflict is important, not only just in the story, but in each chapter and in each conversation that someone has. I mean, just that's what the essence of the human experience is, and things. And so the dynamics between individuals also helps to make a good mystery, as well as human emotion.
Mhm.
I think everyone wants to feel and relate to someone, so these characters have to be relatable in that sense. Now, I think we all have people that we know who have never gone outside of their hometown, or just eat meat and potatoes, and are not particularly interesting individuals, and you need some of those in your books. But for the most part, characters are an important part of, I think, a good mystery.
Well, so I wanted to go back. I mentioned that, dialogue and you said conflict, and that's the thing I really want to follow up on how those two mesh, because so, like I say, I'm reading The Masquerade of Truth, and one of the things I really liked about the intro into this particular book, okay, you mentioned conflict. There is a degree of conflict, as you note, in every conversation. Now, we say conflict and we think right away, oh, this butting of heads, and there's maybe danger or violence or something, and it's not like that at all. You right from the beginning, when your protagonist encounters people on the street in New Orleans, and he immediately comes into the mental conflict of they're different from him, or
Yes.
there are he sees a woman who sparks a certain thing in him that he doesn't want to deal with, right?
Right.
He's concerned she's going to come approach him because he's very clear she's a hooker, right?
Right.
and he
Right.
and he doesn't want to deal with that, and so the conflict is subtle, but it's there. And even when he meets the neighbor of the person he's going to stay with, and then there's conflict between them, and it's all very verbal. It's very fast paced. It's interesting, but it's always there. And I really noticed it because and I'm not in a bad way. Like I'm noticing this because, oh God, this is, so obvious. It's more later on when you think about it, that was a really good, subtle way to start building tension without some big event already happening.
But again, it's something that's relatable because each of us do that. Even when we go to the mall or to a store or something, even though you don't talk to the person passing you, you you can't help but have a certain judgment of who you're approaching, and is that person going to talk to me? And oh, I really don't. I've got to buy that thing. I don't have time for this, and things. And so every approach of a person is almost a very subtle conflict, like what you said. So even if it's not in dialogue, it can be just in passing that we have, and it's very relatable to people.
Yeah, and the balance part of it too, because we're always you hear constantly show don't tell and all of that kind of
Right.
thing, and then oh don't overdo description, but you need a semblance of that. And it really is a little bit of a balancing act of how much do I show now, as opposed to maybe how much do I reveal of this, maybe how this person looks over the course of a paragraph or a chapter even. Sometimes you need to have that description and mostly in full up front. Other times it's better to let it play itself out over some sentences or some graphs. So I was really impressed with how you even were building on these secondary characters in a very almost a subtle way. But for me, I'm a visual person, so I could picture these people as you were talking about them, and really you weren't describing them at all. It was how they were speaking and the way they were
Right.
moving, even, and the accoutrement around them in their setting. I thought it was really really well done. It's one of the better ones I've read of late.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And you don't have to really even see a person or whatever, but certainly by the way they talk, the inflections that they have, you get a good feel about a particular individual. And I know in the book of Masquerade, the Reverend comes up to a cottage. His friend's cottage is very dull, gray and things. And I do describe the cottages and things, and the his neighbors is very colorful and outlandish. Well, the person who owns that is a very colorful and outlandish. But of course, immediately she's like, "Oh, don't you just love my cottage?" and things. And so you get a feel for who that person is, not necessarily by telling me about the cottage and things, but you get a feel for, oh, I'm very a me person. I'm self-centered and everything. Oh, don't you love the color of my cottage and everything else? When actually the Reverend really could care less.
Right.
You know.
Um, uh, Along those lines, I was going to ask you this a little later, but we're talking about characters, so let's do it now. What's more difficult for you as a writer? Is it developing a plot or developing characters?
Um, the characters are actually pretty easy because the plot, I do know what kind of a character I want within that. And then the characters build as I'm writing the story. And so I'm even surprised myself. And I either like a person as I'm writing it, or I start to dislike a person as I'm writing it. The plot is a little bit more difficult, but it is so enjoyable to put all the different pieces together about things. And I'm a plotter versus a by the seat of my pants kind of a writer, although I do both. I'm a hybrid person, but I got to know where it's going. But the characters take me to places where I didn't even think. I mean, I can't. Oh, it was in Masquerade of Truth that you're reading. Is I thought I was going to have one person as the killer, and oh my goodness, I knew pretty well as I was writing this person. Oh no, so and so did it, and I was really surprised, and I come hopping out of the my office and was just elated at the revelation.
Now, see, that's when you know you're having fun writing.
Yeah.
When you discover something and it makes you happy. You
Oh
know,
yes.
I love to hear stories like that. Also, I recently heard we talk. I always talk about plotters and pantsers too. A lot of times I ask writers about that, but I discovered a new term that I had not heard before. Organic writers,
Oh really?
or the other one I heard two. I heard two. One was the organic, and the other one was a discovery writer. So not being a pantser, but being a discovery writer,
Oh, I
which I
like
thought,
that.
oh well, isn't that just the most modern PC way of saying, see the
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I like being an organic
yeah, I like
writer.
that. Well, I like to talk about setting on this show a lot because I think it's really an important thing especially for mysteries and thrillers. I think there's a real element of character in setting, and we talked about this in Tucson, and I'm going to directly steal a couple things that we talked about on that panel because I really loved how you approached it. So the first one, how do you go about bringing a setting to life? As we know, uh, one of your books is set in New Orleans. You live part of the time in New Orleans. how do you ensure that you give a setting the color and the vibrancy that you want it to have without making it a cliche?
Right, absolutely. And to be honest, I really do get tired of reading books where of places that I've been to and things, and um the all these terms you expect come out. And New Orleans is a city that people, if you haven't been there, at least you have an idea in your head. So it's very easy to go through and talk about all these terms that's cliche. So one of the things that I do, and I do this even if I not in New Orleans, if I'm in a different city, I will sit and I will look at people. Just sit at a restaurant or a pub or something like that, and just look at the people who pass by and see what kind of um, uh, uh, culture that they bring into the city. You can spot tourists versus the locals, and I particularly pay attention to the locals because they have their own flavor, particularly in New Orleans. But you have to be able to feel the city and know its idiosyncrasies. I think I've mentioned before to you in a private conversation that we use the term making groceries in New Orleans. And that means, simply we go to, the whole aspect of making grocery, of the groceries, the buying, preparing, all that kind of a thing. And my editor always, cuts that out, saying, as to buy the groceries, not to, you don't make it. But I have to tell you, I was in a book club and someone noticed, picked that up and says, oh, this guy is from New Orleans and knows just by the term of making groceries or eating red beans and rice on Mondays. Simple things. Not wearing beads. We don't wear beads in New Orleans. Contrary to what people might think, people don't go run around the street in beads. Tourists do, but
Right.
not the locals, and things. But I've also had to come to there's some books I wanted to write in a particular city, and I decided I couldn't. Like Masquerade of Truth, I really wanted that book to be set in St. John, New Brunswick, where that the idea came about. And I really liked St. John, but I just couldn't do it because I didn't know the city well enough to write about it, to feel it, and to get the characters in. So I did bring it back to New Orleans, who I knew, and the characters worked well in that.
Yeah, and I think I asked you this one too before, and are there settings? Is there such a thing as a setting that's too overdone? I mean, New
Oh,
York City, London, those are really common. New Orleans, pretty common too. But, is it maybe too much, or is that only if maybe people are getting those cliches, allowing those cliches to overwhelm their writing? Is there a time when the setting itself, and particularly one like a New Orleans or New York, a writer can spend too much time focusing on trying to bring that out as opposed to letting the story play out with its characters?
absolutely, because I think if the story is good, that setting is going to be a part of that story and to wrap it in, and you're going to get that feel without having to constantly, pound it into the reader and things. And so I agree with that. I'm a person that if I pick up a book and look, and I do look to see where it's set in, and if it is a city that I just see either know or have been to quite a bit, I tend to overlook that. I'll go to some place that I don't know about so that I could get that a new feel. So I don't know if other people are like that as much as I am, but I think it can be overdone, and then it loses its mystique, I guess.
Right.
Now, New Orleans is so colorful that you just there's so much about it that you don't lose a mystique when it comes to New Orleans. But I think that there are places that you can do that.
Yeah, New Orleans is one of my favorite cities. I haven't been there a lot. I've been there a few different times. In fact, I was there right before Katrina, and then a few years after, and so got very different takes on the city. But it's such an interesting place on so many levels. Whether it's food or especially food. My gosh, what a great food
Right.
to eat. But music, of course, music. There's just so many aspects of New Orleans. It's interesting to me. I wasn't. This is just off the top of my head question. Living in the South, I mean, um, I think a lot of times we think of Southern writers, and I know you're originally from the Midwest, but living in the South now, when we think of books from writers from the South, whether it's Faulkner or Grisham or Fannie Flagg or whoever, right? Um, it seems like we have a mental archetype about not just the Southern locations, but Southern writers. Does that ever play into any of your thinking about your writing? Do you think, oh, I've done this in the South, maybe next time I will do a book, you know, back somewhere else that's not set here for some, to do something different?
It does, and it's one of the reasons why I set one of my series in the Midwest. Also, I'm familiar with it, but also it is because places like such in the Midwest, you don't see a whole lot, but the places in the Midwest can be very subtle, quiet, and I don't know about you, but I find quiet people, quiet places. There's a mystery. There's a something secretive about it, and something mysterious about the whole setting that it creates something within me, and I want to write about it. And so I I do, for that reason, like to move things around so that it doesn't just become ordinary.
Let's talk about some process things. How do you handle writer's block or any kind of slump? And is there a particular method that you use to bring yourself out of it if you fall into some form of a slump or writer's block?
Right. You know, I do, but I rarely do. And one of the things that I do immediately is I move away from what I'm writing, and so that I can get a clear head and get new ideas coming in. But mostly, what I do is I will sit and think, why do I have this writer block? What's wrong with this dialogue that isn't happening? What's wrong with this scene that I don't want to write about? And sometimes I've come to the conclusion I don't want to write about it because it doesn't even interest me. And I figure if it doesn't interest me, then it's not going to interest the reader. So move on, Gary. Don't try to write about it. Move on. And so I'll do a different scene, and then I realize that what I was so hung up on wasn't right at all. When it comes to dialogue, I was talking to an author who says, I'm really having trouble with the dialogue. And I said, well, you have to ask, why are they having a conversation? And then if the conversation isn't really needed or doesn't move the story along, then again, move on, go to another character and to fit that in so that it's something you enjoy writing and doing. So I rarely get writer's block because of that. I just keep my brain just keeps clicking into how to come out of it. But some of that is also my profession. When working with books and things, you can just really get down into the tediousness of accounting and everything else. You have to step away and you have to ask yourself, what are you missing? And it's the same way with writing. You just have to step away and say, what am I missing? What's wrong with this dialogue or this scene that I'm writing?
Well, let me along those lines. I think a lot of writers, me included, sometimes you really struggle to, as they say, kill our darlings, right? You really can struggle with, you may like a big part of the thing that you're struggling with. And so it makes it really hard to accept that it's not working and you have to let it go.
Right.
Is that something that took you a while to learn?
Oh,
Do you still
oh my
struggle with it?
goodness. It really, really did. And I really pushed for things, but it's my editors who just come back and say, why is this in here? I forget the term that she used for it, but it just it's like this is just pushed in there. and it feels pushed, and it's like, well, I don't want to push a reader, and things, but I really wanted it in there. But you do, it's then I realized my self-pride has to, I gotta let some of that go. Let it go, Gary.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned,
Or
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, let me real quick. Or I can use that in another book or another setting that it will work just fine.
Right, which is, I think, again, one of those things maybe a newer writer doesn't think about so much. You can cut that out. I have a file of what I
Yes,
call outtakes that's probably longer than the manuscripts I write.
yes,
Right.
I
But
know.
um, you mentioned you work with an editor. Tell me a little bit about the relationship you have with uh, editing, both with another person and with yourself. We were just talking about killing our darlings, but so maybe there's a big part of it there. But do you edit as you go? Do you brain dump out your draft and then go back and edit? And then what point does it go to your actual editor for them to start weighing in?
Okay. I dump everything out, and then I will go back and I will see what fits, that what doesn't fit, what flows, what doesn't flow, and that kind of a thing. Then I also look at each paragraph, each line, each chapter, and things myself, and I'll go over a manuscript half a dozen times at least. And an author who doesn't want to take the time to redo and reread and re-edit, I think, is not going to be not going to have a very good book to be sent to the editor, because I have to be happy with it before I send it on. Now, I can be a perfectionist, and there's a point in time I got to stop and say, well, that's what editors are for, and things. So by the time I send it to the editor, I'm pretty happy with it. I'm kind of smug sometimes. And so then when the comments come back, I have to take a step back. And the first thing an editor says is, Gary, don't read this today, or read it today and then put it aside for a day or two and then come back to it. And I have found that my first editor said that, and that has been the biggest help, because you can't help. You put your life and soul into a manuscript, and it hurts to hear that somebody didn't like a particular scene that you really like, or the way you wrote or something. And so anyway, I do take it back, and I don't take it personally. And in fact, I love the editing comments, because it gives a chance to make it better. What I do get upset about is simple things. When I've looked over that, I can look over a paragraph 6 times and I missed something, or the POV is like, well, I know I got that point of view wrong, and
Mhm.
I should have caught it, but I didn't.
It's so hard though when you've written it and you've edited it and you've read it 100 times while you're going through this process, you stop seeing
Yes,
little things.
you
And
read the words that weren't there, or yeah,
right,
you don't
you
go,
have them right in
all of
your
that.
head.
You
Your head
do
has it
it.
right, but then you look and you go, I couldn't possibly have written it that way. You
I
know?
know. And sometimes I get a comment back, and I'm so disappointed in myself. It's not a reflection on the editor. It's a reflection on me. It's like, wow, I am so disappointed that I missed that.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you about voice, okay? Because
Uh-huh.
that is a thing I think every writer is truly struggling to find, is what is their unique voice, the thing that makes them them. How how long did it take for you till you felt comfortable that you had found your unique voice as an author, and the one that you could trust? Was it a long development process for you, or was it fairly natural? What was that process like for you?
It it's actually a very short process, because I've started my writing career very late, in life. I've only been writing really for about 5 or 6 years, and things, and I got it fairly quickly, because as I read it, I just didn't like it. my first manuscripts and things. And so I did change, and I didn't mind changing to make sure that I enjoyed reading it. I mean, to be honest, some of my first manuscripts, I was embarrassed to read them. And so I just kept working at it. But I'm one of these that write every day. And I'll take an hour, at least an hour every day to write. And so changing that voice was fairly quickly until I got it. And the voices are different for the two different series that I have and things. And I would love to start doing more edgy thriller type books. And so I suspect that voice will also change for those. And I'm hoping that it will, so that it really does feel edgy in a thriller.
You shared with me, because I think these two things are related as well. You shared with me separately that your writing career really started out essentially at what had to be one of the darkest moments of your life.
Right.
Do you mind sharing that story with my audience?
No, yeah, because it's a very important one, and I think it could be helpful to a lot of the people who are listening. I know exactly the day I decided to start writing. It was November 19, 2016, and I was sitting in a urologist's office in Mobile, Alabama, and he confirmed that I had a tumor the size of my fist in my bladder, and it had metastasized to my lung, and I had a tumor there, and it had gone into the blood. And I knew that it was kind of a very, very serious thing. But I said, so what can we expect? I mean, what kind of treatment will they do for something like that? Because it sounded really, I mean, yeah, it did sound really bad. And he looked at me and he said, what's the point? And it was at that point in time, I looked at my wife and I said, well, I can think of a lot of points actually, and things. And there's a lot of things I haven't said, I haven't done, or whatever. Now, before that, though, I had a rare form of testicular cancer. And so Lawrence Einhorn was an oncologist that Lance Armstrong had used when he had testicular cancer and it went up to his brain. Well, because mine was very rare, he accepted me as a patient. So the first thing I did after I got the bladder cancer diagnosis, stage 4, I gave Dr. Einhorn a call, and he put me in touch with things. But I decided right then that there were some things that I wanted to do, and one of those was to write. And Rich, one of the interesting things about when you write, things become outward. You put your perspective and things onto the characters, out to the plot, to settings. Everything is outwards. There is such a tendency when you get an illness like this, not only cancer, but if you have depression or MS or any other type of a debilitating thing, to go inward, to think, woe is me. It's like, why is this happening? And, kind of just dwell upon all of that thing. But when you write, you can't help but just become outward and things. It also does other things. When you're writing and you're writing for characters, you have to feel their emotions of whatever situation you put them in. So if they're angry, they're angry. And if you're sad, upset or scared or anything like that. Well, I tell you, when you have a diagnosis where the doctor says, what's the point for treatment? You only have a few weeks to live here. You feel all of those emotions. So when I wrote for these characters about their emotions, it was helping me too. I was feeling it, and I didn't say, woe is me. I was able to write those emotions out on paper, and I think over time, it really helped to heal me and things. And so anyway, I decided I'm going to continue to write because of, I just think it's a very healing. It can go even if you journal. if you have a diagnosis and things and you want to journal your feelings and your thoughts, I just think it's a wonderful recovery and healing process.
Well, yeah, that's really an incredible story. And I have friends who, have been diagnosed with various forms of cancer, also stage 4. And, I can't imagine hearing those words. I mean, I think we can try, we can try to empathize and understand, but I think until it's you, I don't know that any of us can really understand it. But, it is amazing to me sometimes what we can overcome. And I think a lot of times it is latching on to something that matters to you, and clearly writing and sharing the stories that are in your head has been a big help. And I'm very glad for you and for all of us that get to read your work.
And I enjoy hearing from authors who are writing or going through different things, or even just people who are caregivers, have the same type of emotions and everything else. So I enjoy talking and corresponding with those.
Yeah. I only have one more serious question for you.
Sure.
You know, your work is published through, correct me if I'm wrong here, it's the Alliance of Independent Authors. Is that correct?
Uh-huh.
Tell us a little bit about how this works. And one of the reasons I ask is I've talked with authors. The big thing always now is, do you try to go traditional, or I know we used to all think bad things about independent publishing, and now the vast majority of us don't think that anymore for good reason. But there really is a decision point to be made there. And I just talked with an author the other day who said, well, I looked at it and thought, well, I could spend 3 years trying to go through the traditional way, or I can take that same time and get out 3 or 4 books, right? So they're perfectly legitimate. What was your thought process going into working with AIA, and how has the process been for you?
Well, very bluntly, I didn't feel like I had time in my life to risk going through traditional publishing, because that can take years of rejections and that kind of a thing. So what I did was, but I also didn't go the self-publishing route, because I wanted something much more professional. So what I did was more of a hybrid approach. I went to a publisher who had to approve your writing, who had to approve your manuscript and say, yes, we want to do this. We will help you. So anyway, it was, and then I had to go through the whole editing process and all of that, like you would through a traditional publisher. But it was more like a self-publishing aspect. But I wanted someone to approve me first,
Mm-hmm.
who believed in what I was about to write and things. And because I just didn't want to just send something out there and things, but I didn't feel like I had the time to go through the traditional publishing route. I am so glad I did do this, simply because I enjoy the freedom of what I have to do, and AIA Publishing just works so closely with it, that it's just been very, very it's professional, but yet it's been very enlightening for me.
Yeah, it sounds like you're happy with the whole process and the amount of input and control you've had over your work.
Yes, very much so. Very much so.
Well, I always like to end on what I like to say. I mean for this to be a fun question. I hope it is. I hope it's not too stressful. Let us just say I had the magic power to put you together with one of the following 3 people for a conversation, whatever that may entail: dinner, drinks, long walk, up to you. I can put you together with one of these 3. Who would you choose? And the options I'm going to offer you are the great playwright Tennessee Williams, former Louisiana Governor Huey Long Jr., or the great civil rights icon Rosa Parks. I can put you together with any one of those 3. Who would you want to sit down and have a long chat with?
Can I have a room? I can't have a room, can I, with all of them, or a panel or anything like that? Okay. You know, I'm gonna Huey P. Long. I absolutely gotta figure out what about some of his thinking, about some of the, what I would say, scandal in it, and how did he feel about the, some of the turmoil that went on with the Louisiana State House, and then the day that he was killed at the, on the courthouse. The other reason why I would choose him is because he married a Midwesterner from the state of Indiana, and so I would love for her to be there, to be able to say, wow, what was it like to be married to a guy? Here you come from the Midwest to the South, and you're married to Huey P. Long. Tell me about that too. And so, because the differences in the cultures there had to have been something worth write about,
Yeah. Well, he was a larger than life figure, if ever there was one. I mean, if there, that old cliche about look it up in the dictionary, there'd be his picture. That's true, man. He was larger than life.
And I crossed the Huey P. Long Bridge over the Mississippi River many times, and it was the scariest bridge ever to go across. And so I would like to also ask, why did you let them name that bridge after you?
Well, Gary, thank you very much for being here today. This was a fascinating conversation, as always. Like I say, I think you're a really great writer, good guy. I'm really glad that. Hey, man, I can't imagine, like I say, what it was like to get hear your doctor say that. But man, here you are, all these years later. You're still here, taking names and kicking books, man. And I'm really glad for that too. It was really a lot of fun to have you be part of the panel that we were on together in Tucson, and I look forward to seeing you again in the future at other of these things.
Take good care, and thank you so much.
Absolutely. And before I sign us off, I'll say the same thing I said at the beginning, which is, look, if you haven't hit subscribe, please do so. And if you would be so kind out there, whether you're on the podcast or you're watching us on YouTube, probably seeing my dogs walk around in the background, I'm sure. Hey, you're not going to beat that kind of content, are you? Right? If you are interested in writing and you're interested in writers and how writers work and think, I think this show is really going to be helpful to you. And it's a lot cheaper than going out and buying all those craft books at Barnes & Noble. So for myself, Rich Eisen, for my guest today, Gary Kreigh, this has been the Open Mic. So help others find the show. Leave me a review. Hit subscribe. And then I'll leave you with one final thing. Tomorrow is not promised to any of us. So please make today count.